All right, welcome back to Morning at NTV and thank you for staying with us. My name is Romy Busiku. We're getting into this conversation, taking a look at how the lockdown has affected people. When you talk about the lockdown, well, you're talking about COVID-19. They are all related. Well, the lockdown was part of the national response to combating the spread of COVID-19. That meant people had to stay home, businesses were not operating, and those who continued, somehow they were finding some challenges when it comes to transportation and so forth. So public health was an issue as we were actually coming up with all these measures to combat COVID-19. But I do have Marie Nanyanzi, she's the program officer at Twaweza, and they authored a report, Sauti Za Wanaichi. Yes, that's the report that was authored to bring to light the suffering of many Ugandans in this case. You know, we've been talking about how can we stop the spread of coronavirus. That has been the main point. But what about the people who are grappling and wallowing in poverty? By January, yes, before we constituted this lockdown and before COVID-19 made its way to Uganda, 22% of Ugandans didn't have anything to eat. And these people were saying they were actually about to run out of food. That is 22%. Now, during the lockdown, that number went to 26%. Meaning, issues to do with poverty were already prevailing or existing in Uganda. They were only compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures that were put in place, the lockdown and so forth. So Marie Nanyanzi is going to help us expound on this report and understand what is entailed in the same. A very good morning, Marie. Thank you for coming to Morning at NTV.
Thank you.
First of all, what is entailed in the Sauti Za Wanaichi report?
Okay, so in the Sauti Za Wanaichi report, what we have in there is the citizens' experiences of livelihood and food security during the lockdown, that is between the 18th of May to the 4th of June. And during that time, we were in the extreme lockdown, limited transport access for most Ugandans, and that's when we carried out the survey. So we tried to understand what is it that citizens are really facing. Are they working? How are they coping if they're not working? And that is what our research has in there. So
how are the citizens' working lives changing?
So from the study, we see that the citizens, 85% still continue to do some work. That is excluding the household chores and hobbies.
Go back.
85%.
85% have continued with their work.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Have continued to their work during that time. But we also see that 15% said that they did not do any work at all. Meaning there was nothing productive being done.
85, let's not go too fast. Let's not lose my viewers. 85%, that is the whole of Uganda.
Yes.
They continue to work. Now,
yes.
Urban centers, give us the number and give us the number for rural areas.
Okay.
How many in the rural areas continued working?
So in the rural areas, we have about 16% that did not continue to do any work. And then in the urban areas, 20% did not continue to do any work. So the effects were higher on those in the urban areas compared to the rural population.
Wow. Go ahead.
Yeah, so in that we still try to understand further. For those that are not working, how are they sustaining themselves? And most of them, about 33%, say that they are depending on their relatives for food, which sheds a very dull picture for us. Because if they have to depend on relatives and very few
That's 38%.
Yeah, 33%.
33 in urban areas or the whole of Uganda?
That is the whole of Uganda. Then when we look at those in the rural and urban, we see that 10% in the urban said they were depending on the friends and family, while 5% in the rural are saying they're depending on friends and family to survive.
How are the eating habits and household spending habits changing?
During that period of the lockdown, we did see that there was a decline in how much is spent in a household. And between the rural and urban, we see that in terms of cutting down on their expenses, the rural population cut down more compared to the urban population. Because when you're in the urban center, you don't expect to really cut much. Because if you have to buy tomatoes to make a meal at home, you've got to buy them. While in the rural, you could go to the garden and get that your tomatoes or your matoke or your dodo that you need to have.
So the regular Ugandan in the urban centers was spending how much on a daily basis?
So in the urban centers, Ugandans were spending about 12,300 on average, while in the rural, during this time of the lockdown, they are spending about 10,300. So in the rural, it's lower, but when we compare the figures that we got in January, in the rural, the rural population was spending about 14,600 in January, and then come to the urban, they were spending 13,100 in January, which shows you that, yes, there is a cut, but the cut is higher for the rural population compared to the urban. But again, we did ask, do they have enough money to cater for their daily needs? And we see that the population that is saying they are short of finances to cater for their daily needs is higher in the rural compared to the urban. And yet when we ask which people have been able to receive some sort of assistance during this COVID time, we see that the number is higher in the urban at 24%, and then 7% for the rural. Yet we are both facing challenges, that is both in the urban and in the rural. So most of us go with the assumption that the rural community is not facing any hardships during this time.
Which is wrong. Which
is wrong, because remember, they are producing foodstuff that needs to get to the market. But at that point in time, all the trucks were on high demand, meaning if you need to get your food to an urban center from the village, it's going to cost you a lot more. And if you can't afford to do that, then that implies that your food is probably going to rot in the garden, or you're going to sell it at a very low price, so you cannot manage to sustain yourself as you were doing before.
All right, Marie, I did take a look at the Sauti Za Wanaichi report, and I think number 4, inside number 4, did catch my eye. I think it was number 4 or 5. It did catch my 5. Now, it was talking about 6 in 10 young children in Uganda are eating the same food like the rest of the family. And these are children aged 6 to 12 months. These are breastfeeding children. Now, how is it possible that the same children are eating the same food like the rest of the family? To me, that was very, very, very scary.
Well, yeah, it is scary, but just observe the people around you or in your neighborhood, or when you go to the villages. Most times when a mother is going to serve her food, she will get her plate and then she will have the baby there and try to feed the baby as she's also doing her feeding. So the best she will do is probably smash that food a little bit so that it goes down easy on the child, but she will not, for most Ugandans, they will not go an extra mile to prepare something separate for that child.
Wow. Yeah. Now, the same report, Sauti Za Wanaichi, actually talked to 1,600 respondents in Uganda. Now, did the respondents complain about availability of food during the COVID-19, or did they notice any changes in the availability of food during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, so during that period, citizens did say that the availability of food changed for some foodstuff, that is for cereals, for nuts. And if you can recall that during that time, in the urban center, the price of rice, posho or maize was really escalating to a point that I think most of the producers or the traders were hoarding what they had, because we're not sure how is this going to play out, considering that we usually expect that maybe by this time of the year, we are in a dry spell of some sort. So at that point, everyone was keeping whatever they had, and hence the prices went up. So if you're in the rural area, the complaint of the prices going up was actually higher in the rural area compared to the urban. But yes, the prices did change, and some food stuff was not as available as it should have been in other times.
And of course, that begs to get to this conversation about agriculture. If you're talking about food, then it's very, very possible to talk about agriculture. So what activities were these respondents engaged in as far as agriculture is concerned, and what challenges were they facing in doing so?
Okay, so at that point in time, citizens were continuing with their farming of maize, beans, rearing the animals as they used to do before, but the challenges that they still faced were issues of high cost of inputs, and then the distribution of those products to the market. Those were the key challenges that citizens were facing at that point in time.
And what coping strategies do citizens have access to?
Well, in terms of coping strategies, that is a challenge for Uganda because most citizens would either cut their expenditure, others would get items on credit, others would borrow. But when we look at the borrowing between January and now, we see that there is less borrowing at the moment. And in terms of cutting expenditure, we see that those that say they will cut expenditure have actually gone down, which shows you that we have cut that expense, but we can really not go any further down. But most citizens, in terms of who do they run to get assistance at this time, most of them are running to their family. It's less of friends now, yet at the start of the year, more than a half of the population was saying they would go to friends and neighbors. But now the number of those that are going to family is a lot higher, which means that you go to those that you know, by all means, they've got to help you. The other alternatives are really
And
not.
here we were thinking in rural areas, people will not be asking for help. But even there, people are doing the same. We've had stories of people leaving their houses. You go to the neighbor, ask them if you can harvest some food from their garden.
Yes.
So I'm telling you, the situation has been overall in the whole country. But then we've seen government concentrating their efforts on Kampala and the surrounding environs when it comes to helping people.
Yes.
Was that misguided? Because we've seen the rural areas, people in the rural areas also suffering.
Well,
What do you make of that?
the thing is, you cannot say that it's completely misguided because you have the urban challenges. If you're in the urban center, you have issues of rent. You have issues of paying for every single item that any survival that you need to undertake is based on the income
And
that
of
you
course,
get.
they're engaging in non-agricultural businesses.
Yeah. So if at all at that point in time, arcades are locked, salons are locked, every other business is locked and you're not making any earning, it implies that you won't have any money to buy any food. So
I see where you're going.
yeah, so giving support to the urban dwellers was okay. But then when we say that we ignore the rural, not give them anything, that is also a challenge. So probably the solution would have been, that is something that should have been done way back. Have some kind of registry where you know that, okay, this is, because we have national ID and so on. Can we get more detail on these, on the citizens of Uganda?
Exactly.
So that you know who is vulnerable, who is
Exactly,
not.
Marie. It looks like the whole, the way government has been reacting to the coronavirus response. Seems like they were reading the Twaweza report, Sauti Za Wanaichi, even before it came out, because I was looking at insight number 1, because I explained to you insight number 4. 6 out of 10 children are eating the same food like the rest of the family, 6 to 12 months. There is insight number 1. 1 out of 10 Ugandans has no work to go to.
Yes.
Banangi, this is very, very, very callous. 1 out of 10. That is 10% in the whole country.
Yes.
8% in the urban areas and 7% in the rural areas. Could that be the reason why government chose to focus on the urban areas? Because in the rural areas, people, seems like work continued.
Well, yes, that could have guided that strategy. But if we completely forget that during the measures applied were affecting the rural dwellers, then
Yes.
there we are falling short of really making sure that this intervention works. So in a way, we should have thought about the rural population as well. How do we ensure that transport systems are really not drastically affected? Because at that point in time, we all know that to hire a truck was really a lot more expensive since no private cars were moving and people needed to get around. Yeah.
Wow. So how best do we navigate this problem so that we give the Ugandans the help that they need? What are some of the recommendations from Twaweza as you author this Sauti Za Wanaichi report?
So for Twaweza, what we think at the moment is that there is a need for policymakers to recognize that the issue of social security or social safety nets needs to be discussed, because over time we have been saying that citizens are facing challenges, because you cannot talk about issues like, say, democracy. You cannot talk about issues like elections when someone else is actually starving. So if at all someone has a backup plan that in case I don't have work today, I can probably rely on some kind of safety net, then that helps the citizens. So at the moment, the key thing is that there is a need to review the social safety nets, because at the moment all we know of is the SAGE plan, which caters for the elderly. So how about the youth? Because we see 20% of the youth still say that they did not have any work, or they don't have
Youth
any work.
Livelihood Fund?
Well, you know the challenges
Yes.
with that.
Yes.
It's a process.
Access.
And yeah, access. And then some of the youth probably don't have the skill to write those proposals. And so how do we
And to
guide
look for
them?
a group to get
Exactly,
into. Yes.
exactly. How do we guide them? There are challenges with some of the systems in place, but
Marie Nanyanzi, I think we can leave it at that. You've sent the message home. She's the program officer for Twaweza, and they authored the report, Sauti Za Wanaichi, right there. You can get yourself that report. I shall be expounding on that conversation tomorrow between the hour of 3 to 5. They're going to be 2 hours. We shall be discussing with the Food Rights Alliance on the same conversation, the Sauti Za Wanaichi report. Well, you should look at insight number 1. Many Ugandans have continued with some form of work. Sauti, and number 2 indicates that some Ugandans have no work to go back to. And number 3 indicates that out of those who have continued to work, 6 out of 10 continued operating. So those are some of the insights with regards to the Sauti Za Wanaichi report. Let's take a very short break. We'll be right back with more information right here on Morning at